to address it with you. But welcome. We're going to be discussing post-pandemic recruitment, lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic and its lasting impact on college admissions. Real quick, we will let everyone introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Nathan Rice. I serve as the Director of Undergraduate Recruitment at the University of North Georgia. If you're not familiar with UNG, we are a regional public university of just under 20,000 students on 5 campuses spread across the Northeast Georgia area. We are also one of the 6 senior military colleges in the United States. Very proud of that military tradition and history. And I'm excited to be here today to share our experience and maybe some recommendations moving forward for recruitment.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tobe Frierson. I am privileged to serve as the Associate Director of Recruitment at Georgia Southern University. Georgia Southern is actually, we span 3 campuses in Statesboro, Hinesville, and Savannah, Georgia, serving roughly over a little bit under 27,000 students that are on those campuses. And I'm super excited today to share with you all a little bit.
And hello again, everyone. My name is Caleb Rogers. I am the Associate Director for Recruitment at Augusta University. We are a public research university in Georgia with a real focus on health science programs. I'll brag like everyone else and say we have multiple campuses, but ours are all in town. We've got an undergraduate enrollment of a little over 5,000 and overall a little over 9,000. So just like Toby said, excited to share with you a little bit about what we've gone through this year and share some of our experiences with you. To give you a little bit of context, as everyone is aware, we went through a little bit of a struggle last year. 2020 was a year for all of us. The pandemic brought challenges professionally, personally, mentally, emotionally, all of those things for all of us. And it didn't stop when we brought ourselves into 2021. It's still going on, and then working in admissions on top of that, in a field where we really rely on interactions and relationships with people and things like that. It's been tough, and we would all be lying if we said that there haven't been continuous challenges. So we really wanted to bring the opportunity to discuss those challenges, to be very transparent and honest with you about the challenges that we've faced, the solutions that we found to those challenges, and then maybe some recommendations for how to keep moving forward out of this pandemic and still use some of the lessons that we've learned. I'll start by telling you a little bit about the changes that we made at Augusta University because of COVID-19. First, we had to shift to virtual events. So during the spring semester, we kind of had to put an end to all of our events. And even opening back up this fall, we did not move forward with really any on-campus events. So we had to move to virtual. We were able to do that by hosting smaller events, really targeting specific students and interests. So that was sessions for different academic colleges, sessions for different student service departments. We're right now in the middle of a virtual admitted student series of sessions. And so finding ways to really target smaller events in a virtual setting for students has been helpful for us. We had some of our admissions counselors do after hours school-based visits. So rather than being able to do a private visit at a high school during the school day, which obviously posed a bit of an issue during the pandemic and in the virtual setting, we had some of our staff decide that they were still going to do school-specific visits where students are with their peers that they know, but after hours, so that they could join virtually from home or from wherever they were after school, to not really try and interfere with the class schedule, but still keep it very specific for that student, for their school and their peers. We started the daily virtual information session. So for a while, we did have to stop our tours. They are back up and running now, but we are continuing this daily virtual information session so that students who, for health reasons, have not been able to leave the house, as well as just a multitude of other reasons, they still have access and opportunities to hear more from us about the opportunities that we have. We've been really excited to use the You Can Book Me links, and I know a lot of schools are using different platforms for this, but really putting the information out there where students and parents and supporters and counselors even can book virtual meetings with our admissions counselors so that they can still have that individualized attention and that personal one-on-one conversation that they may get when they visit campus and meet with a counselor in the office. So those are really cool opportunities. We're all going to talk a little bit about this, but we did this year get to go test optional for admissions. We were able to shift our admissions requirements. We are part of the university system, and I know Toby and Nathan are going to mention it as well. So having that allowance this year was pretty exciting, even though the situation was not that exciting. But we were able to remove test scores as a requirement for admissions. We were looking at a 3.0 GPA. We did have to include test score requirements for some of our programs, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But overall, we were able to remove that requirement. We really started focusing a lot on our communication. How do we really make this student focused and keep everything authentic? So all of our messaging had to be reviewed, and are we putting the student first in what we're saying? Does this email check in on a student? Does it make sure that we're meeting them wherever they are and put them in a good space? So we've really kind of refocused and recentered a lot of our communication efforts. I mentioned we started back on our tours, but obviously those are smaller, more intimate tours so that we can socially distance in a room and things like that. But they've definitely been a lot more personalized because we're only having 1, 2, or 3 students with 1 or 2 guests each visiting at a time. And then virtual everything. So students could no longer drive to campus and drop off documents. They could not stop in our office to complete forms and things like that. So we really expanded our online offerings for forms and inquiry options and ways that people could submit paperwork and things like that.
And for Georgia Southern, we also altered our admission requirements. So students traditionally would have had to have had a 2.5 GPA to be admitted with said test scores. So Caleb just mentioned test scores were removed. And then we also increased that GPA as well. So the GPA went to a 2.6. No test scores, and that's just for regular freshman admission. So that's one thing that we had to do to make those changes. One significant change, we had a scholarship deadline of November 1. And instead of keeping that in place, because clearly students and school counselors, their worlds were all thrown. There's no way they could get things together by November 1. We extended that out all the way to February 1. And so we shifted that scholarship deadline date. And that was something that definitely benefited students. And we saw those in the amount of scholarship applications that were submitted. We started providing one-to-one Zoom meetings. We use Slate. And so I think Augusta used a different platform, but we use Slate Scheduler. So those of you who have Slate, that has worked for us. We tried to cap these at 15 minutes because we really wanted counselors to be able to do a certain amount of them per week. Like, hey, try to get a family on the screen face to face. Of course, you all know by now, a lot of students will pop on with their cameras off, but that was something that we implemented to just try to be in the same space with students and give them some of that one-to-one direction. As like you just heard Augusta say, we did not have any large scale on-campus events, so everything's shifted to a virtual platform, and we're still virtual for our large scale events. So open house, university-wide, getting all of our campus partners, all of our faculty members and everybody adjusted to hosting a Zoom room and keeping that interactive and keeping it engaging has been quite the task, but that's what we've done. And we actually have another open house this Saturday. And then we also, in addition to having the large scale, we're going to put Georgia Southern on display within that open house event. We allow colleges to raise their hand and say, hey, can we do a college specific event? And so we've had live events as well, hosted in conjunction with a college, and then we'll provide admission support for that. So that's also something we've been able to do. One of the most significant things I think we changed is when the pandemic happened, we were right about to close out that class. And so we were going to have an accepted students day. And all of a sudden we were like, wait, we definitely can't do this, but we still need to speak to our accepted students. What's the best way we can do that? Luckily, we had already been partnering with a company called Student Bridge. Many of you may be familiar. And we created an accepted student experience. And we had no idea the impressions that it would get, the visitors that it would get. But when we looked at the analytics from turning that thing on last April, last April, to engaging with us all throughout this past fall, we really helped ourselves by building out a comprehensive platform with student videos, faculty staff videos, presentations, basically all the information that an accepted student would need to know was housed in that. We liked it so much. We have a brand new accepted student experience out right now. And so that's one thing that we changed and hopefully we'll be continuing to keep for the future. But we also, we conducted off-campus in-person info nights. Now, granted, we're in Georgia, so we kind of had the benefit that, yes, it was the pandemic, but we're in Georgia. So I'll let you guys read into that if you want. So we were able to book venue spaces. Yes, we had COVID procedures and protocols that we needed to follow, but we also had brave people that literally met us out. And I'm talking last fall, September, October, November, Georgia Southern was on the road, going to different communities and having these smaller events. And so we made that change. So the events are things that we'd always done, but we did them in a COVID safe manner. And a lot of our other competitors weren't on the road. And so it really benefited us as far as students coming out. And then lastly, we never closed for in-person tours, except when we were actually closed. So when the university reopened, and I believe it was like the last week in July, certainly by August 1, we were open, we basically figured out what the university was going to allow as far as the space for each presentation room that we have on our various campuses. So of course, we reduced the amount of students and the amount of families that could be in those spaces, the amount of students and families that could also be actually on those tours. We had all of that. We were following all of our COVID checkoffs, and we literally still stayed open and invited people to campus just in a different kind of manner. So those are some of the things that we were able to do at Georgia Southern, and some of the changes we made.
Tobe, I'm going to put you on the spot real quick because Melissa put a question in the chat. Tobe and others who use Slate, very interested to hear what other ways you've altered your use of Slate to find more efficiencies in this virtual year. And I know we are in Slate, but we are finishing up implementation still. And so a lot of what we're doing in it at Augusta hasn't necessarily been altered because of the pandemic. It's just now starting. So Tobe, I don't know if you have anything you want to share other than that.
Absolutely. Hi, Melissa. Thanks for asking about that. I'm probably going to give you my information for me to actually talk to you about all the ways in which we're utilizing Slate. This is our first year on Slate. And so I have better people in my office that can answer that question for you. And I would be glad to reach out to them to make sure that you have that information.
And we've got another one for you, Tobe. You're popular. Can you share more about what you brought to students for off-campus in-person info nights? And did you target certain populations or go all over the state?
Oh, great question. So basically what we did, because many students couldn't visit, I mentioned those limited capacities. So we basically went in, we gave them their full presentation in terms of, this is what you need to do to apply. This is how all of our requirements have changed at this point. This is what you can expect once you get on campus. So basically we talked about how students were actually, how we were delivering the Georgia Southern experience within the pandemic, because there's a lot of trepidation about that. And then, of course, we gave them opportunities. If they came out to those events, they got an application fee waiver. So that was something in it. But it was literally just the admissions team that went. This wasn't where we went in with like a whole team of people and rolled out financial aid or anything. It was an info night that they could come to. We tried to do it contactless. And so we gave them, QR codes to snap so they could say that they were there. I'm trying to remember whether we actually provided physical information, but we literally just went so they could engage with us in a one-on-one manner.
Great. Thanks so much, Tobe. Here at the University of North Georgia, like my colleagues here in Georgia, we were test optional for this year. One of the things that we really work to do is remove test scores from really consideration on anything, definitely from admissions, but even for scholarships and different things like that. We wanted to be consistent across the board, that when we were communicating with students and families, that we weren't considering or using test scores, or those weren't required, that there would really be no thing lost from students who did not submit those test scores. We did cancel all of our large scale on-campus events and off-campus events. We really haven't hosted any in-person events outside of some small tours that I'll talk about here in just a second. We did take this opportunity to host some university-wide open houses. As I said earlier, we are an institution made up of 5 campuses. So traditionally we have one open house each semester on each campus. And so the pandemic forced us to have one open house for the entire institution. While that was definitely challenging and made us kind of rethink how we could convey the message and make sure that we were able to give students the information they wanted about the campus they were interested in, it also gave us some opportunities to maybe expose students to campuses and opportunities they would have otherwise not heard about. And we were able to provide resources that maybe we couldn't have at some of our smaller campuses as far as faculty and different student services that were available to talk to them during the virtual open house. And I think it's important to try to find things like that in this COVID environment that maybe, although they were big challenges, can definitely be helpful moving forward, and we can try to find the positives. In last spring, we did not have tours on campus. We did restart those this fall. We removed the indoor information session. So we utilized Slate to, I think the earlier question, to actually have the students text us when they arrived on campus. And we confirmed the car they were in, and the tour guide actually went out and met them outside in the car or at the car. Not only did that kind of limit exposure and people coming in the building, but really from the feedback we received from families, it was very positive. It felt like a more personal and intimate experience. And really, when you think about all of the things that have changed in the pandemic, whether that be curbside pickup for shopping, or food delivery service or takeout, I think we've all become familiar and accustomed to getting that kind of service in our cars or through apps and text messages. So it was something that we were able to provide to our families rather than them parking, trying to find our office and having that kind of traditional experience. It's something we're planning on keeping moving forward. The other thing that we really focused on was increasing our communications with families. As Dr. Jack, I think, so eloquently put it yesterday in the keynote, we don't just enroll students, we're really enrolling families. And that doesn't, it goes throughout the entire institution. We need to show them that through recruitment, and then as current students, and then of course through graduation and as alums. And so we really tried to take this opportunity to communicate with families what we were doing for COVID, what the outlook was like, and then what we offered the students. I think, we traditionally think about talking to parents and talking about safety and finances. And I think really at this point, at least even with those and maybe above those, I think what families are looking for is transparency through the university, from the university. I think if we've learned anything in the last 18 months, it's that really we don't know what's going to happen. But I think if we can convey that we'll take care of our students, that we'll be transparent, that we'll let them know what's going on and what we're doing to support our students, then we'll be very successful. And I think that at this point is much more important than the glossy pictures maybe we have on a brochure or on our websites. The other thing that I just want to point out here is I think, initially in March and April of last year, we sort of rushed to get everything virtual and online and make things available because our offices were closed. And I think that was really well placed. But I think as we move forward and even this spring, one thing that we've really tried to do is think about the groups of students that maybe have been more impacted by the pandemic and the shift to online. Maybe that's because they live in an area that doesn't have consistent internet service, or their family can't afford the internet service because of economic situations. Maybe they don't have technology. So while I think we need to make those things available, we also need to be mindful that not all students have equal access to that technology or those virtual options. As kind of in addition to that, we really tried to increase engaging touch points with students. We had student takeovers on our Instagram that were really well received. Again, trying to really give students that authentic look of the university and try to be transparent in that, last April, yes, our students were maybe at mom and dad's or on their apartment and not going to class, but they were still having a UNG experience and being educated. So we thought that was important to convey. And the other thing that we've kind of try to add to our communication, and I think it's always been important, but I think even more important in this time of pandemic and uncertainty is really ramping up our positive communications. I think universities are really good at two things: really good at talking about themselves and also telling students what we need from them. And so we really tried to be positive to students, make our communications more about the students, and do things like when we received the FAFSA, sending them an email saying, you're on the right track. We should have your financial aid package soon. Thanks so much for sending it. Transcripts, those kinds of things. Not always that everything they get from us is asking more and more and more. The other thing that we really found engaging to students with our virtual options is to really set limited times and invite students to meet with our counselors or come to our events at specific times. I think early in the fall, we saw, we had options available for students to schedule appointments or times they could meet with counselors, but we really left it wide open. Counselors maybe would have 20 hours in a week that was available to be signed up for. And I think we're all sort of guilty in a virtual environment of sort of putting things off. It's always going to be available. I'll do it next week. I'll do it tomorrow. And what we really found this spring, and a couple of the admissions counselors in my office really love this charge, is really creating certain days and events at limited times, and saying, if you want to talk about UNG admissions, here is your time. I'm available to you, even sometimes personalizing it based on the school. And so we really found that to be really effective. And so I think with virtual options, even more so, I think it is very important that we create that urgency.
One thing, Nathan, real quick, while you're still unmuted, a couple of questions have come in asking you a little bit about the communication, specifically with these underrepresented student groups and populations. So can you talk a little bit, about examples of before and after pandemic communication and what you changed with those populations, and then B, what type of communication did you use with these groups, knowing that many of them may not have access to these virtual options?
Sure. So we really increased our mailing to students to try to get in, those mailboxes, get in front of the students and the parents, knowing that they might not have virtual options available. I think that really served us well. Sending personalized letters to the students from their admissions counselor, and really just giving the students ways to connect with us that didn't require internet access and those sorts of things, at least constant. So I think that was helpful. We also worked with our schools while we were very limited in our recruitment opportunities at schools. We tried to do drop-offs. We also mailed several schools a lot of materials and business cards. And of course, we did some of that before the pandemic, but we're just a little bit more mindful of, the ways that we connected with students previously, was face-to-face and in their high school and in their hallways. And so we really put an extra emphasis on making those things available at the schools. As far as how we communicated with them, I think to underrepresented groups, first generation students, but really all of our students, we just tried to take a little bit more of a kind of educational approach, be an advocate for them, and talk to them about the college search process kind of as much as we talked about UNG. Again, like I said earlier, I think universities are really good about talking about themselves, but we really tried to focus on talking about the students and their journey. We also sent some communications sort of telling students it was okay if they weren't meeting those traditional deadlines. To Toby's point, we moved our regular admission deadline, but we communicated that with students and tried to convey that, it wasn't because they were behind or anything. We understood what was happening. And we felt like that really helped us with students, and maybe they hadn't traditionally heard that.
So now we're going to talk to you all about a little bit of the feedback that we've received. Please continue to go ahead and give us your questions in the chat, but we want to be sure we get through all of our information. So we see your question and we're certainly going to get to it by the end, but keep putting those in. For us, the feedback that I'm going to share with you is specific to some guidance counselor, or excuse me, some school counselor breakfasts and luncheons that we conducted all throughout last fall and then some this spring as well. And as we met with those counselors, we really wanted them to tell us, hey, what's been working for you throughout this pandemic recruitment cycle? What should we keep? That kind of thing. And so they definitely told us that being able to keep things in a virtual space is going to be beneficial. And so as we talk about how to move forward or whatever, I think they feel like they can schedule more students with schools as opposed to just having one of us show up. If they've got 3 different rooms available, UNG can be in one room virtually with a group of students. So can Augusta, so can Georgia Southern. So they were like, please keep things in a virtual space. We like that. They also mentioned that their students don't mind hopping on and joining virtual tours. That for the virtual tours have been helpful as well. The one-to-one meetings, those scheduler meetings that I mentioned that we were doing. Sometimes it's a student on that appointment with a school counselor. It's not always just a student, or not always just a student and their supporter. So that's they gave us some feedback about those individual meetings as well. Of course, they threw the test optional at us because many of these high schools have seen an increase in students saying, oh, I want to go to Southern now, I can go. Now, to the adverse of that, while they said that's great, they're glad that we've granted access, they also wanted to know, what have we changed internally with support services? So some of these students who may not have gotten in had it not been from this test optional environment, what are we doing to ensure their success? So that one was thrown back at us, but they did like the idea of, wow, look at all this access. Look at these students who traditionally would not have come. Can you guys continue to do that? And so then I had the opportunity to say, it's not our decision. It's up to the USG. And then lastly, the later scholarship deadline definitely worked out for them as well. I can't say that that's something that we're going to keep. I can't tell you right now that we're actually not going to put that November 1 back in play, but they did mention that having the later scholarship deadline helped their students, and their students felt like they had a chance at putting their name in the hat and going for a scholarship. So that's some of the feedback that we got from school counselors.
Yeah, we also got a lot of feedback through the process from students and their supporters and families. And one of the big things that stood out to me is that as we started to reopen campus, as we started to offer tours and even smaller events on campus again, a lot of the visitors that we had shared how much they enjoyed the virtual options available as almost a pre-visit type of experience. So they were able to join a lot of our virtual events, a lot of our virtual sessions, and get some foundational information and get some answers to some of their initial questions before taking the trip to campus, before coming to one of our events. And so it was able to kind of give them the opportunity to break up that information search a little bit and help them really get as much as possible before planning the trip. In addition to that, they really appreciate the individuality of these virtual-based meetings and these conversations that we're having, whether it's in a smaller group or one-on-one setting. They really enjoy really getting to have a personalized experience with our admissions team and with our counselors, and even with some of our current students.
Yeah, and some other feedback that we received that we wanted to share. We were fortunate in Georgia in the fall of 2020 to really buck some national trends. Several of the schools in Georgia were ahead or enrolled more students, and hope that continues in 2021. But just wanted to touch on here, I think that it's important, and what we've heard from counselors and students is really this idea that we all are collectively helping students enroll in college and getting them to the finish line. If you're not familiar with the marketing concept of a rule of 7, it's the idea that someone needs to be reminded or told about something 7 times before they'll take an action. And I think it's important to remember that that doesn't mean they need to hear about UNG 7 times or Georgia Southern 7 times or Augusta. It really just means that they need to be thinking about college. We need to build that momentum. I think everybody in our profession has done a great job adjusting and trying to accomplish our goals and help students. But I do think we just need to remember how much sort of that momentum maybe was gone this year, of seeing, a student maybe that wants to come to UNG might see Caleb in a lunchroom and see Augusta and say, oh, I need to actually finish my UNG application, that sort of thing. So I think as sort of a profession and a group, we just need to remember how important we all can be to each other. And then, of course, ultimately, the most important thing is how important we can be to the students to help get them to colleges and universities and reach their academic goals.
The other thing I wanted to mention on this slide, everyone, I know that we recruit students. We connect students with educational opportunities, but we are all held to standards based on numbers. And so I also want to just mention, to alleviate any fears, like these processes and these changes, even as we've started to transition more and more to on-person, keeping these virtual options, we haven't seen our numbers really suffer. I know that part of that is living in Georgia, and our population here is on a little bit of a different trend. But I want y'all to be confident and comfortable with the fact that our numbers are all doing well. So keep that in mind.
So, and we've got about 15 more minutes left in this session. So we're going to rush through this so we can get to you all, because you all are asking some questions and we have a few questions to pose to you. But for us, some challenges, and these challenges are not going to be unique to Southern. As you hear me talk about them, or as you see them on the screen, many of you are going to be able to nod. But I told you we were open for in-person tours. That limited space means a lot of students did not tour this past year. They just couldn't get in. They tried, but there wasn't an opportunity. So that certainly was a challenge, and remains to be a challenge too. These technology issues, luckily, all of us have remained connected, or at least we have on the panel, hopefully you guys as well. But we certainly were in the middle of sessions where people's feed would drop, our feed might mess up. And so they were all definitely different types of technical issues that we are still working out. We're a lot better now though. I mentioned the scholarship deadline moving, but I didn't mention the whole scholarship process had to be reworked. We had to remove test scores. We definitely still assess students based off of their test score in order to award a scholarship. So we had to come up with an entirely different process, and shout out to our scholarship coordinator and our assistant director who oversees that process as well, for all the heavy lifting they did to present something and then for that to get approved. And so that's something we did. We're dealing with a lot of applications right now. A lot of students have been able to apply because, like I said, they haven't had to submit those scores. So just being able to keep up with our comms and different ways to communicate with students, that's been a great challenge, but it's also taught us a lot. And we got a lot of things that we can keep in place for the future. Having our SOAR is orientation at Georgia Southern, having SOAR strictly in a virtual space, that was a challenge. Man, it's hard to tell a student what life's going to be like on campus from being on a screen, and they're not on the campus. And so that was a challenge for us. And then lastly, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, just our faculty and staff participating in these spaces and kind of understanding how to navigate them and how it definitely needs to be different from an in-person presentation.
So to kind of repeat some of the same challenges, technology was a big thing for us. Getting people on board with using Zoom for some things, Microsoft Teams for some things, social media for some things has been difficult. A lot of that had to do with participation and buy-in from around campus. Getting some of our faculty who are experiencing the same virtual fatigue that we all are to put extra time into these events and to stay late for a virtual event was difficult, understandably. In addition, we rely so much on our current students and that student perspective and voice for all of our visits and events and communications. So getting current students to be able to get involved when they were at home taking classes or when we're doing something at 7 p.m. virtually, making sure that they have internet, that we have people that have the access to log on and participate in these events with us was really difficult at times. We saw a lot of turnover here during 2020 and going into 2021. And so training new staff, we had 2 recruiters that started in March of 2020. So those obviously pose challenges for us. I mentioned earlier removing test scores for admissions, but our scholars programs, which are our direct admit programs for medical school, dental school, nursing, they maintain test score requirements. So we still had, based on those academic colleges, we had to require these test scores for these programs. So that kind of changed up our communication and made us cautious of how we were communicating the test score optional policy. And then additionally, I mentioned earlier, we are new to Slate. So trying to implement Slate and use it for all the different things, all the things has been extremely difficult to do during the time.
Yeah, and we shared similar challenges to those other your all's institutions. I think the biggest thing that I feel like we saw, and I think probably people across the spectrum of SACAC and higher education saw, is just that, these institutions have been around for a really long time, over hundreds of years, and we've built these norms and ways that we operate. And there, in about a 2-week period in March of 2020, that all had to be kind of reworked and rewritten almost immediately. And so we did face lots of challenges. We continue to face challenges, but I do think it's helping us kind of modernize as an institution, be more nimble, have more things like video and quicker communication timelines. And so I do think that is a positive. I think the other thing that will continue to be a challenge, especially as long as we're in at least some sort of virtual opportunity or world, is just attracting new and different students. I think this academic year has probably been the best to be recruited if you were already interested in UNG, or I'm sure other schools are similar. Your admission counselor is available. We're offering all these virtual opportunities. We're offering campus visits. We're over communicating, at least compared to what we did previously. And so that's great. But I think the big challenges in this virtual environment is attracting those new students, those students that maybe you're not on their list already, or you're not strong in that market, but you have great things to offer those students. So I think that will continue to be a challenge and kind of on recruitment professionals to try to find ways to reach new and different students for our institutions.
So we finally made it to questions, and I do know we have 2 that are already in there. So as we're going through the prompts we're going to give you right now, and you guys please start firing these responses at us, I will address the 2 questions that are already there. So first, for you guys to be thinking about, and we've got like literally 7 minutes in the chat with you, what else have you all implemented? You heard the things that the 3 of our institutions tried to do during the pandemic and are going to try to continue to do, but what else have you guys implemented that you haven't heard in this space today? Also, have you already planned any pertinent shifts from in-person to virtual now that you've seen it work? So basically, are you all going to remain in this virtual environment in some capacity? And if so, what might that look like? And then lastly, what things will you now consider that you did not previously consider prior to going into this virtual recruitment space? So these are your prompts. Please feel free to go ahead and shoot in the chat, and we're going to address as many as possible. But to kick it off, there was a question a little bit earlier when I mentioned that Georgia Southern did 8 school counselor breakfasts and luncheons. Those were actually in a virtual space. So the specific question was, how'd you get buy-in for that? Was it in person? No, we turned our traditionally in-person events into a virtual space, and our attendance went up in them. We had many more student counselors able to join us. Also, from where they were joining us from, our out-of-state presence was so much bigger, giving them that virtual option. And we did exactly everything we would have done in the space, as far as presenting them with opportunities for hearing from our director, hearing from an AVP. We did our presentation. We talked in the local ones about freshman admissions plus dual enrollment. And then we also talked about transition opportunities if they had students that didn't start at Southern but needed to transfer in. So we did everything in the space that we would have normally done, but it was virtual. So there's that question. And then there was another question, Caleb and Nathan, maybe you guys can answer this one. It was in regards to how have we used social media, not just within this pandemic, but do we also try to use social media as another opportunity to evaluate a student for admission, since we weren't using test scores? So I'll let you guys tackle what you all did with social media.
Sure, that's a great question. We did not use it in any of our evaluation, either for admissions or scholarships. We really just focused on the information in the application and those sorts of things.
Same.
Caleb, what kind of questions do we have coming in, or even comments that people are making?
Yeah, so a couple of people have shared a couple of things. I know Justin shared that at FIU, their admitted student days as campus caravans and doing some self-guided tours have been some of the changes and things that they've been able to implement. Holly shared that their counselor luncheons and breakfasts will only be virtual moving forward for those same reasons. And doing some counselor and student webinars to address some of the changes will help in the future. So those have been some of the ideas and the things that have been shared with us. One of the questions that came in is, how are you impacted by USG in making these decisions? In some ways, greatly. So, we've talked about the test scores and some of those things. And unfortunately, as much as we advocate, we don't get to make those calls. We do rely on the system for that guidance. But in terms of changing up some of our deadlines, changing up how we offer some of these things, really, we've gotten a lot of autonomy. At least I can say that. I know we did start transitioning to some in-person events again this spring, and a lot of that came from guidance from the system, but by no means was there that requirement. I think that the test score requirements has been kind of the big thing that they get to say in, but they've been very supportive in giving some agency to the schools to make some of these other decisions. And what I'm going to do real quick, y'all can keep sending this stuff in and we'll answer what we can, but I'm going to go ahead and put us on our last slide, which is our recommendation. So to answer some of these questions that are still coming in, these are the things that we are recommending based on our experience, based on what we've learned. We want to share these with you. So first, someone asked earlier, are you going to continue to do virtual and on-campus options? And the answer is absolutely. There is no substitution for the amount of access that these virtual events have given, and Nathan will talk about that later. But we're going to keep doing them, keep doing virtual events and meetings alongside the in-person opportunities. A lot of them have been simple to plan, at least the smaller scale events. You're saving some money. You don't have to necessarily pay for the virtual events, but we definitely recommend that you continue doing those. Recommendations regarding communication: keep this authenticity that we all somehow discovered in 2020. Continue to keep our students and their families first during this process. I think we've learned a lot about what challenges they face and how to better communicate with them during this transitional time that we need to keep moving forward. Keep the individualization as much as possible, and then continue to offer virtual and video content for people who can't necessarily come to campus but have access to things online or have access to things through their counselors or through their schools. Keep sharing that virtual and video content as much as possible.
Yeah, and I think, keeping in mind access again, right? Virtual and digital forms and events and materials are really a must at this point in 2021, especially as comfortable and as used to that as students and even families have become during this pandemic. But I really just want to encourage everyone to not leave behind those without technology and internet access. It's really easy for us to, think that everybody has an iPhone, has Wi-Fi, can jump on a laptop and join us. But ultimately, that's really not always the case. So we just need to keep in mind that not all students are going to be able to access virtual events, and it might not be their preferred mode of communication. The other thing, just to kind of piggyback really quickly off the USG question, is that, here in Georgia, we're not, the system will make that decision whether we require tests or not. But I just want to encourage people to still use your voice on campus, in meetings with the system, or even just in your own practices of how maybe you can't make that ultimate decision, but maybe could you lessen it in your review process, or could you not use it in scholarships and those kinds of things? Because I don't think, while we are sort of limited by our institutions in some ways, I think we have an important voice to advocate for the students.
And then lastly, our deadline shifts that I mentioned. If you all have the opportunity to do that, we recommend that you play with your deadlines a little bit and make sure it's student serving and it's school counselor serving. And finally, we wanted to wrap things up with something that's really not related to all the things that we do, but actually related to who we are. And I'll be completely transparent. We had some people that when Georgia Southern said, hey, it's time to come back to campus, that for whatever reason, whether it was medically or whether they were taking care of someone else, they didn't have that opportunity. And so the team went from this size to this size with a few people who had to be out on accommodations. And our ability to be able to keep them involved, even when it comes to, kind of how we were interacting, kind of being back in place, was difficult. And maybe that's something that we could have looked at a little bit harder, like, wow, we have these off-campus people, but we have you in the office. And then those who were in the office that weren't on accommodations were like, well, maybe I want to be home as well. And so just the team dynamics that the whole thing created was very, very difficult and challenging. And so I recommend that you look at your team players, make sure everybody's doing well, make sure that morale stays high, or at least we're addressing those issues, particularly if you have people raising your hand saying, this isn't really working for me right now, like we're really suffering in this. And so we wanted to leave you all with that. We're definitely excited that you were able to join this presentation, and I'll flip it over to Caleb for our final thoughts.
Yeah, again, thanks everyone for joining. I know we did have a really good question that came in. We are out of time, but Paul was asking about kind of measuring the yield and things like that with these events. I know we don't have that data yet. That's something that we're definitely going to look into, but we just don't have it collected and analyzed just yet. But feel free, we've all got our emails in the chat. Y'all are more than welcome to reach out to us individually or as a group to kind of talk through these things. So I apologize for running out of time on some of these, but we do appreciate y'all joining us, and we hope to hear back from you. Thanks.
Thank you all so much.